Once a year or so, we take 3 or 4 weeks and we just review who are we and where are we going. Especially where are we needing to be in the next few months. So everybody's heard it and everybody understands the heart behind it. And so what I'm doing to outline this study is just use these 4 core values that we teach on from time to time. But they're just core to our church. They make us who we are. They're kind of the attitude or the emotion of our church. When people come for the first time, they feel those things. Even if they're not said and explained, they feel these things. Those 4 things include 2 that we've looked at thus far. One is that we develop relationships among ourselves, and so we looked at the whole point of how do we make church into a home, a family. You know, over the years, over the last century or so, what's happened in the American church is in the last century, the early part of it, church became an institution. And you'll hear it critiqued many times as being institutional. That gradually evolved to the point where church became an audience. And we were concerned with crowds. Bigger is better. And then we struggled with, okay, we've got all of these people coming, but how do we recover what the Bible speaks to? And that is, we're supposed to be a family. It's about loving each other. We're about being tight. And so we spoke to that. The second one, this core attitude, this drives us and carries us along is knowing Jesus. And we spoke to that last week. This week and next week, there will be a little bit of these 2 tie together. I didn't know how to really separate them easily, and so if you feel some overlap, it's because I couldn't get the 2 apart. But one of them is what we'll look at next week, and that we serve together. And next week, what we're going to address and speak to is, where do we need to be as a church in the next few months? And just so if you're kind of new around here, you understand, well, why is he spending a whole Sunday teaching on that? Well, one is we are about to buy this building. And where things linger right now, and I say linger because things keep getting bumped back because of people being out of town and not being able to make meetings and stuff like that. But once we get that all settled down in the next few weeks, we will actually sign the papers, and this will belong to us. When it does, we're no longer renters. We're owners. And there's obligations like, now we've got to pay for this thing. And we've got to fix it up the way we want it. And on and on and on. And you'll hear me emphasizing this morning, so I'm going to go say it now, and that is, we're not buying this building for us. We're buying it as a resource so we can use this building as well as we can figure out how to use it to minister beyond ourselves. And we've got to think that way. So that's next week. We'll get real practical on where we need to be in the next few months. But this morning, I want to back up from that immediate few months from now way of thinking, and I want to look down the road. This is going to be vision. And that's expressed in this value we call outward thinking. And so to do that, I'm going to use a word, and I hope this word kind of sticks in our mind. Kind of like when you mow grass and you've got socks on and you come inside, doesn't matter how you shake them out, there's still grass stuck in the socks, mine at least. You wash them and there's still grass there. Because it got stuck. And I'm hoping that this morning, with the help of the Holy Spirit, I can get to the Velcro of your mind where this idea, this word, seeing, gets stuck. And it's just there. Lord willing, when the day comes, if many of you will leave Norman and move on to the, a job in another state, or you'll get married to somebody, and as a result, you'll move, and on and on and on. But that you'll look back and it's still there. You took this concept that's expressed with the word seeing with you. And so to do that, I'm going to just walk through a passage that God has used to instruct me for decades now. I keep going back to this. I've taught on this before, but I have no apologies to make for teaching on it again. But in Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 35 and following, let me read it. You may want to pull up your phone app and read it in the translation that you're accustomed to and prefer. But it reads, Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." Let's walk with Jesus through this experience. Where he is in the northern part of what we think of as Israel. They referred to it in their day as Galilee. There's a lake there. It's primarily rural with a lot of fishing industry. And there's a rich host of population centers. Some were referred to here as cities, and some were villages. And I'm caught by the fact that Jesus cared for both of them. You know, I'm a farm kid from western Kansas. I went to school in what would qualify here as a village. And it's dying, but it's still there. Jesus would love those people. And he loved me. Cities would have been the larger population centers. They wouldn't have been enormous, but they would have had some size to them. They would have had slightly stronger economies, though they probably weren't rich, but there was just more business there. They were more politically developed. In fact, the word in the original language is polis, which was where we get policy or politics from. But that was their word for city. There likely would have been more medical resources and it wouldn't have been a surprise to see more illness in the villages. Cities were cool, and they still are. There's something about cities that attracts us there. Villages, on the other hand, would have been smaller. They would have had a tighter population, demographic. They would have probably been very clannish. People were related to each other, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Fewer medical resources, I imagine, and generational sin may have been more pronounced in the villages. It was in the cities, but it would have been more amplified in the villages because it's shared. Jesus went to both, and Jesus took his disciples to both because he wanted his disciples to think about villages as well as cities. And what did he do there? Well, it says he taught and he healed. Teaching and healing are what he still wants done. And so he has gifted his church to do both of these broad ministries. I won't go into a lot of detail on these, but healing obviously was that physical emphasis. It addressed just the basic needs of people. And it would have addressed healing families and family wounds and spiritual strongholds and emotional wounds. Teaching was where you're trying to get people grounded in truth, trying to point them in the right direction and wise living, and encouraging them to press on. Both are vital, and Norman needs both of these ministries. And River needs to be getting better and better and better in both of these ministries. Verse 36, though, brings us to the word I'm emphasizing, seeing. It says seeing the people. The word people here is the word crowd. Multitude. It might be translated mob, although this was not anything violent, or there wasn't anything, it wasn't a coup or a takeover, but it was just this mass of people, a horde. And Jesus saw this multitude, and they mattered to him. Let me read it again in verse 36, where it says, seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited. They were like sheep without a shepherd. He felt compassion for this mass of people. This moved him. It gripped him. It mattered to him. And I want us to think for a moment about seeing, about being individuals who see, but that we're, as a church, we see this multitude where we live. Seeing assumes that we're paying attention to them. Seeing assumes we stop and think about them. Seeing stretches us to care for them if we're seeing well. In other words, we have to put our busyness on pause so we can notice them and think about them. Where we can pay attention to the details of what's going on with them, the tendencies and the trends with them. We have to be wondering, what's going on with these people? A few years ago, 16 years ago to be precise, it was 2005. Some of us who were around when this church launched, even the year before it launched, began to see Norman like we'd never seen it before. And God used a couple of maps, and I'm just going to briefly show these to you. They're just part of the artifacts of the history of our ministry. Some research had been done by what at the time was called the North American Mission Board for the Southern Baptist Convention on the United States, on the general comparison of how churched the cities are. Now, what that means is on a given Sunday, how many people in that city or that county wind up in church. It doesn't tell us whether they know Jesus or not, but it does tell you that they cared enough to go to church. And the darker the color, the more red it is, the lower the number is. What struck us was not what we saw going on in other parts of the United States, but what we saw going on here. There's this red spot right in the middle of the country. And where that red spot is where you're sitting right now. If we back away and look at Oklahoma, it looks like this. And what we became aware of is something we sensed. We knew something was going on in this city that we couldn't put our finger on, because when you live here and drive around here, there are churches on every corner. But if you study this city, as they did, people are staying away in droves. And generally, the younger an adult is, the more likely they are not to be in church. In ways, Norman is more like the West Coast. It's more like San Francisco than it is the counties adjacent to where we live. In another sense, those two things tend to blend here. And you see both of them at the diners and at the barbecue places. We've got a challenge, and these maps woke us up. They helped us see Norman afresh. They helped us see that if Norman's not going to come to our churches, we've got to somehow or another get our churches out into the businesses and the schools and the homes of this city, We've got to figure out how to do that. And so that birthed the dream that came to be called River Church. What's interesting to me is that we are about to buy a building. In just a few weeks, we will own this property. River, if we're not careful, this property will sink our dream to the bottom, because we will become so preoccupied with church happens here that we don't see our city anymore. And what I'm hoping to do this morning is to remind us, yes, this is a resource that we have needed and we can use, but we must continue to see our city rather than being satisfied and satiated with just coming to church in a building. Does that make sense? Again? There was another illustration a few years ago that I think helped us kind of imagine how then do we think about and move into our city. And this illustration was, do we see Norman as a pancake or do we see Norman as a waffle? Pancake thinking has its place. Pancake thinking is where we imagine that everywhere in town is the same. And that what works at the university somehow or another happens to work here and vice versa. And we just sort of anywhere you go, that the ministry of the gospel is always the same. Waffle thinking sees a city like Norman as actually a combination of a city full of villages. It's full of these little places that if we start to look carefully, they're unique from each other. And if we're going to reach into them, it's a little bit like when we were kids, and maybe we still do, when we have waffles, that we enjoy pouring the syrup into one pocket at a time. I went prayer walking at the university the other day. Classes had just dismissed, so there were students everywhere. It was a lot of fun. But as I walked by those buildings, even though the brick is the same color on all of them, I was reminded that each college has its own style. It's its own pocket of people, and probably is going to be reached best by someone in that place ministering to that place. The same thing's true in our city. Norman is a city with a city within it called a university, and reaching the university is going to be unique from reaching down the street. We're going to have to think in terms of how do we reach well into the youth, the high schools and the middle schools. When we first started, there were only 3 or 4 children in the church. Now we've got a youth ministry, and we're going to have to think well about that. We're going to have to think about how do we minister to children well. Are there languages that we need to begin to focus in on those? What about senior adults? What about foster children? What about single parents? I could go on and on and on. These are pockets of people. So what do you do when you see things? Jesus saw things and had compassion for all of it. And in verse 37 and verse 38, here's what he said. He says, "Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest.'" And River, what I take from this, for myself and for us, is that seeing means work. And if we don't want to work, all we have to do is ignore our city. But if we open our eyes to it and start to pay attention, and God starts to burden us with things, along with that will come work. And work means some training's involved. You know, people volunteer to mow the church lawn, and we get it all scheduled, and they show up, but they've never driven one of those big zero-turn lawnmowers before, and somebody has to teach them how to drive those works of art. And so we train people in something as basic as that. But ministry means you have to be taught how to do it. And you have to be taught more and more and more about how to do it. So training is a part of this. Work takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, and it takes resources. But don't let that hold you back or hold us back, because that's where the blessing is. That's where the joy is when we give ourselves and we put some cash into it. Work means from time to time you need rest. And you need to just realize I can't just hit it. Once in a while, you have to take a break. Seeing assumes also that you can't do it all. When we see these multitudes and we see the needs in this town, and we start to see these pockets of people, and what are we going to do there? Or what needs done there? Jesus was aware of the fact that his disciples, his band of followers, couldn't do it all. So he didn't tell them to do it all. What he told them to do was to pray for more workers. There was some work they were going to have to do. But one of the biggest contributions they made to the human history, the reason we're here today, is because they prayed for workers, and God raised up more workers. This is brilliant. When he says beseech, it's the idea of pleading and begging. It's more than we just mention it in prayer. We're pleading with God. God, would you give us some workers? There may be times in the seasons of a church where pausing to pray for workers is the primary thing we're doing right then. We may just put a lot of things on hold and say what we're going to do for a while is pray for workers. If Jesus gave this charge to pray for workers to this small band of men who were following him, and they couldn't do it all, then where are these workers going to come from? Well, the workers come from the harvest. And the next time you're driving around town, or the next time you're walking across campus, imagine that there, among those people that Jesus cares for and wants us to care for, there are potential workers who 20, 30, 40 years from now are still laboring in the fullness of the Holy Spirit and the guidance of God, and are harvesting for him. River, let's trust him for that. People we don't even know yet. Children that aren't even grown up yet. People that just started to attend here. One day, maybe the laborers in the harvest that we care about right now. Let me pray. Lord, you love this church, and you have loved it for the last 15 years, and you want it to bear fruit well into the future, well beyond my time, their time. If we're going to do that, Lord, help us to see out there. Help us to believe that out there are people who are going to go from here to the ends of the earth. We will touch the nations from here. And so, Lord, do that, would you? Don't let us lose our ability to see like you see. And Jesus, start with me. We pray this in your name to the Father. Amen.